everyone. Welcome. It's Jason and Zach with RTB Technologies. And today we want to talk about AI risk management, especially as it relates to policy, right? So everybody out there has probably heard of an acceptable use policy as it relates to computer use within a company. But now we have AI tools that are showing up in every department, whether it's marketing, HR, finance. And often these are showing up before leadership even knows that they're there. And businesses are excited about using AI for all its productivity and things like that. But the problem is without guardrails, it can become a business liability. And that's because employees are, maybe unintentionally exposing data or creating compliance violations. So Zach, let's get into a little bit about how AI risk is now business risk.
Yeah, certainly. AI risk started as AI risk, like it's the new thing. It's been a new thing for a couple of years now, and everyone's really hot on it, trying to gain business efficiencies and things like that. But it does introduce a whole lot of risk to your company, not just from the technical perspective, but just the business as a whole. And a few of those ways are just understanding what AI is. A lot of AI systems actually have bias and discrimination based off of the information that you feed them, because they're only as good as the information you use to train them, which then introduces business risk because most companies do not want to be known for bias or discrimination. They want to make sure that everything's neutral and that everything is kind of up to par with decision making and policies. Then there's manipulation. You can manipulate AI content, AI generated content, depending on the prompt that you have. Loss of human agency. So over reliance on AI can actually erode human decision making and autonomy, which is really bad for a business, because then who's actually running the ship? Who's the one that's actually in charge? And that's, obviously as a business as a whole. There's privacy and data security concerns. So that's a little bit more on the kind of human side / technology side, because unauthorized data use, data leakage. There's also surveillance risks, because most of the data that you put into LLMs, especially if you're using free licenses, you don't own. The company who owns the LLM actually owns it, so you need to watch out for that. Legal and compliance risk, violation of regulations. Misuse of AI can actually breach laws like GDPR, HIPAA, and even the EU AI Act, which, if you didn't know, the EU leads the way on most of these protections for humans and for privacy rights, and they have an AI Act, so something to be aware of. Property infringement, IP property infringement, so intellectual property infringement is a big one, because AI just pulls from whatever data it can. Whether or not that's actually copyrighted or anything, it doesn't pay attention. It just finds data and then uses it. Contractual breaches, AI may not be covered by your agreements with your customers or your partners. You need to make sure that there are certain stipulations in those contracts to meet your business needs and goals. Model misuse, lack of explainability. Some of your decisions that are made by AI may not actually be justified or understood by your C-suite or your leaders. So AI can make a suggestion and you're like, yeah, let's do that. Guess what? If you can't justify it or you can't understand the rationale behind it, it's probably not a good decision. And then, there's things like loss of customer trust, brand damage from public backlash of unethical AI use, potentially, and then employee concerns, because there could be some dissatisfaction from employees if you use AI in a distrustful manner.
Yeah, that was really really insightful. A lot of information there. You hit on a couple things I want to expand on, especially as it relates to data privacy and maybe the training documents that AI is using. So I want to talk about that, especially as it relates to using free AI tools. So the difference between having a paid version and a free version. We've talked, in the past about, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. And that is certainly applicable in AI. If you're using those free versions, you're not the customer, you're the product, right? And so what that means is that anything that you upload to AI is in the free versions could be used to train those models. You could, whether it's client data, internal documents, things like that. It could be sensitive, or regulated data, which is really important to consider. So let's talk about how to actually protect that. What can you do if you have a paid version, what settings can you enable to make sure that your data is protected appropriately? And I'll just hit on a few real quick. And it could be, disable training on your data. There are settings, whether it's ChatGPT or whatever your preferred AI tool is with those paid versions. Make sure that you're restricting retention and requiring authentication. Monitor usage logs, things like that. But next, let's go a little bit about some details about an AI acceptable use policy and what they should include. Unless there's anything else you wanted to hit on, Zach, before we touch on that.
Yeah, no, I think moving into kind of what an acceptable use policy should dictate is definitely useful in this conversation.
Yeah. So the first thing you should have is permitted use cases. For example, right? I mean, and this is all very specific to your company and what you want to allow. But examples could be drafting emails, summarizing data, doing research, using it for marketing purposes, content development, things like that. But the idea is, you want to encourage innovation, but do it in a way that you have visibility and control over it. But in addition to permitted use cases, you also want to outline prohibited use cases. Like what should your people not be allowed to use AI for? And examples for that could be, don't upload customer data into there. Confidential documents, things of that nature. And Zach, you hit on earlier about the reputational aspect of that, and that's definitely a consideration when you're talking about prohibited use cases. But you also want to have the approval process, because chances are when you put this policy into place, you're going to have some permitted use cases, but then you want to expand on that later. Or maybe your employees have some ideas on how to use this better. So you want to have an approval process. You want to outline what that looks like, and who is the approval authority. Also, make sure that that's clear. And once we know that, and all that's outlined in your policy, you want to distribute it, right? And you want to make sure that all your employees sign and attest that they have read it and that they understand what that policy entails. And along with that, you want to have enforcement and disciplinary actions, right? So what are the consequences for violations? It could be warnings, it could be retraining, and eventually it could lead to termination. All that should be outlined in the policy here. But the big takeaway for this is that the AI acceptable use policy is not just a document. It's evidence if a breach happens. It's evidence that you're doing your part, that you're doing your due diligence. Zach, anything to add on any of that?
No, you really hit the nail on the head with a lot of what you said, because due diligence is a big part of it. And for companies at this point, if you don't have an AI acceptable use policy, you're kind of behind the curve, um, especially with the rise of most companies using AI note takers and inviting them to meetings and things like that. That's use of AI that you really need to understand and know where that data is going, who's using it, how it can be used, and really understand it for your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the big takeaway on this one is you can't stop people from using AI, but you can guide them to use it safely, not only for themselves, but for your company. So I hope everybody stays safe out there, stay vigilant, and we'll see you next time.